Need to know all about a septic system? I'll go over all that and a real-life example in this video. Hi everyone, this is Jason with Uptrend Investor, and today I'm going to talk about a septic system. So according to the US Census, about 10 years ago, about 1 in every 5 homes has a septic system as opposed to the sewer system, or connected to the sewer system for household waste. So if you are just getting into real estate investing or you've been around for a while, chances are you're going to encounter a septic system at some point. So this video is going to talk about what it's about and some of the key points to think about when you're looking to purchase a property with a septic system. So for starters, let me do a little schematic here of what a septic system is. And our house that we live in now has a septic system, and we've gotten to learn a lot about it over the last couple of years. So what you have, first of all, you have, let's say, your house right here, a couple windows, get your roof, and your chimney, right? So, looks like a little happy face. Anyway, so this house is an example of one that has a septic system. Now, a lot of times they might be in rural areas, but also they could be in a county island or some subdivision. Our house is definitely not in a rural area, but we have a septic tank and a septic system. So you never really know until you find out when you are looking to purchase. So you take your dishwasher, your laundry, washing machine, your multiple toilets in the house. You take all these things, and they all lead to your sewage line. So here's an example. So everything's coming out through here. Let me bring it up a little bit. And then in this example, as opposed to being connected to the public sewer system, this example, including our house, is connected to first what is called a septic tank. And the septic tank kind of looks like this. It might have 1 or 2 chambers, and here's an example of a 2-chamber tank. Here's the surface, the ground surface there. So what happens is the water and waste that comes from the house goes into this first tank, empties into this first tank, and then all of a sudden all the fluid and waste accumulates in here. What happens is the fluid starts to separate as the solid goes to the bottom. So this bottom area here, it's called sludge, separates that from the liquid, we'll call it here, and then on the very top layer is the scum layer. See? Pretty fun, huh? So scum, and then liquid, and the sludge layer. This is the solid waste. So what happens in this first chamber is the sludge, the solid waste, is broken down, digested through what's called an anaerobic breakdown. And let me write that down here. Anaerobic breakdown. And that's actually where the name septic system came from, in case you're wondering. It's septic because it's bacteria-based, anaerobic bacteria that breaks down this waste here. As the liquid forms in this area, the liquid eventually makes it to the second chamber, which again starts to fill up here and usually leads to another area here of sludge, usually a smaller area, as the liquid itself becomes more and more clear. From there, that's not where it ends. So this is actually the septic tank here. That's the septic tank. So then that leads to something called the septic drain field. And what that field is, it's basically a collection of porous porous areas here where the fluid comes through here, comes in through multiple holes in these in this field here, and then the fluid drains out into the soil. And this fluid, it's called percolating. This fluid percolates into the soil, and then it gets taken up into, you know, little plants here. And it's got its roots, so a lot of the fluid gets taken up into the plant roots, but also taken up into the groundwater, which is right in there. Very simplified schematic, as you can see. So, a couple more points about this system. The tank here can be up to 2,000 gallons, somewhere around there. Again, I mentioned it could be a single tank or a multi-chamber tank, and I read somewhere that apparently most tanks are dual chamber like this. And the tank here also, going back to the tank, usually has a couple access points by manhole cover, and what happens is that's a place where a professional can come in and empty out this the sludge here, because if it starts to accumulate too much, then all of a sudden the sludge starts to overfill into the chamber, into this chamber, and then the sludge starts to get into the drain field, and that can cause all sorts of problems. So this fluid really should be liquid, as opposed to liquid and solid mix. So that is the basic concept of a septic system. And now I'm going to go over some of the key points of maintenance, which as a real estate investor you need to know about if you are owning a property with a septic system. Okay, so with a septic system, there's a lot to do with the maintenance, but I'm just going to go over the what I would consider the top 2 points of maintenance. The first point is what we call a pump out. There are several other terms for that. A pump out is really important because if we go back to the original picture, like I mentioned earlier, what you would do is you would have a professional who comes in with a truck that's hooked up to a vacuum pump, and that pump basically goes in through the manhole cover and pumps out this sludge in order to keep the sludge at a manageable level, a predetermined level. Usually they will remove not all of the sludge, but some to maintain some of the anaerobic bacteria still, to keep that into that tank so it continues the decomposition process of the waste. So this is called a pump out. The key with a pump out is, as a real estate investor, you got to know generally how many times did the previous owner have to get a pump out. So not just how frequent, but what was the cost of each pump out, and did the frequency make sense based on the size of the house, the size of the tank and the drain field. And if you had a small house with a small tank and they were doing pump outs, say every 10 years, well, there's something wrong there. You know, it's not quite matching up. So when we bought our house, it is a 3-bedroom and 2-bath house, and what we found out was it had a really small tank, and the tank was also illegally placed at a location next to the pool, which is also not correct. But it turns out that the pump out had to be done pretty much yearly, which is probably a little too frequent as well. And it can cost anywhere to a couple $1,000s to get that pumped out each time, depending on the professional use. So that is one of the key points, is the pump out. That is the maintenance. You also have to think about the city or the county that you're in. Sometimes there are mandated pump outs. There are requirements. It has to do with environmental reasons. Also, the pump out, like I mentioned earlier, depends on the number of people that you have in the house. And is it a multifamily, and how many people are going to be using it, how many families. That plays a role into how often you're going to pump out. And overall, the tank volume is also key, like we mentioned earlier. So you have to think about all these things when it comes to the frequency of pump out and ultimately what your expense is going to be as the real estate investor. The second big part of maintenance is something that I will term don't abuse, don't neglect. So what I mean by that is there are certain activities that whether you live in the house or your tenants live in the house, and you have to remind them certain activities that should be avoided. For example, dumping oils or a lot of grease down the kitchen sink. That can have an effect on the tank and actually the whole system. And it can also cause a problem because it is much tougher to degrade by those anaerobic bacteria. So avoiding oils, and I'll write that in here, oils and just any type of grease you want to avoid. So avoid oils, grease. You want to avoid flushing of non-biodegradable items like cigarette butts or feminine products or anything else. Really shouldn't be going into the toilet or the kitchen sink. Another thing that you want to avoid is try to avoid as much as you can food waste, because it makes sense. The more solid waste, the more that needs to be degraded, and the more often the pump out, and the more likely there'll be damage to the whole system, and the more it's going to cost you as the real estate investor. So you want to avoid all that. The other thing to avoid is certain chemicals, especially probably most commonly bleach, can definitely affect the bacteria as well as the lining of the system itself. So these are the key things to avoid, and that's what I mean by you don't want to abuse the septic system, you don't want to neglect it. So you definitely want to avoid these known problems that can occur. So the next step after the maintenance is really thinking about also the environmental issues that can happen that can affect your septic system. Okay, let's go over some environmental factors that you need to think about as a real estate investor if you're getting a property with a septic system. Let's look at, I got a little schematic here. Again, the house is over here, and there's the septic tank again, and there's the septic drain field. So you're getting used to seeing these pictures. So some of the environmental things to think about when it comes to this system: trees, roots. For example, let's say you got a really nice tree. That's great. You may get another one over here. That's great. That looks really nice. But think about it though, if you have a septic tank underneath, or you have the drain field right underneath, then you can have roots growing in and messing up the whole system. Definitely want to avoid that. Okay. Other things you want to avoid when it comes to environmental factors. Sometimes you're thinking about upgrading the property and you're thinking about value adding it, and let's say you want to hey, I want to put in a storage shed, something like this, a storage shed, or I want to let me put in a new place to park, a little driveway. All these things will value add, and I think I can increase the rent by doing these things. Well, the problem is these things with time they and this is just soil right here, with time, with vehicles driving in and out, and with more and more stuff getting put into the storage unit, puts weight on this area, and it starts to settle and can affect your tank. It can affect your drain field. So that's something to think about when it comes to environment. The other thing to think about is if you are in an area with heavy rainfall, with a lot of rainfall, that can cause problems with the the soil and the settling and issues like that. Also with the amount of water that's coming in from the property itself, if that's excessive, if you have a property where you have in reality a lot more people living there than you thought you did, you have people that are living there and they're not paying rent, that kind of thing. Someone's long lost cousin that's living with them, and they don't want to tell you about that, all those things. Well, more people in the house leads to more wastewater. More wastewater leads to more water through the septic system, which can quickly overwhelm the system and can lead to a lot of these problems like we talked about before. The worst case scenario is that the sludge from here fills into here, goes out into the drain field, and then you wind up having to replace the drain field. So when we bought this property that we live in and we found out that the system is much smaller than it should have been to handle the house, then we wound up having to put in a whole new drain field. We moved it. You can see in the video coming up here that we moved the drain field from the backyard to the front yard. We did really all sorts of stuff to mitigate the problem, and that's very costly. So the job that we wound up paying for this house that we bought was about $13,000. So just to give you an idea that there's a lot of environmental factors that come into play when it comes to having a septic system. So now we're going to go into a video of my wife who's going to do a little tour and show you where we had the where we had the septic tank in the backyard, and she can show you some of that coming up right here. Okay, so show us what we got here.
So what we have is right here we have the big cement tank. The previous person had half the size house, so the tank was too small. So what they're doing is putting two pipes out. One big pipe.
So this is the tank right here, the big cement block?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And this big black and white is some of the water is going to come out there and go down to the front into a drain field. This is the water from our kitchen and garage. And then they did a separate plumbing and have a big thing about this big, and that tube is for the bathtubs, bathrooms, and rest of the house.
Okay.
The reason being there was too big a house, too small a pipe.
And what are these cement blocks over here?
These cement blocks were actually the sidewalk I'm stepping on. They brought a big backhoe in and just right at the joints, cracked the joints and pulled them up at the joints. So after they finish this, they're going to fill the dirt back in, smooth it out, and put those cement blocks right back. So all we have to do is seal the joints.
Okay, so how about we go up front? We'll go on the other side of that gate right there, and we'll see what it looks like up front.
Okay, sounds like a plan. And here we are in the front. This is where the new drain field is going to be. You see this front yard with all this dirt? Underneath they dug a 6-foot hole, put the new sand in for the new drain field, and then they covered it up. And it was pretty impressive. They just brought this big cat. Within less than an hour, they had a 6-foot hole all over the front, the trench you see in the back, and the back hole that we already looked at.
So this is let me zoom out, or zoom in rather. There's the gate that we saw from the other side, right?
Mm-hmm. And that big pipe is the pipe coming in to the drain field right underneath here.
So there's the big pipe. And the drain field is going to be where?
It's already buried. It's starting from right here all the way to our driveway over there. This whole thing that they dug out, they put sand and media.
And what's over here, this flatbed?
This is the pipe that they use, because I mentioned that they had to separate it into 2 flows. They only did 1 flow yesterday. They ran out of time. But see, this is how big the water flow is.
Okay.
4 inches.
Okay.
And the sand they covered with those. see the perforations on them? That's where the water gradually flows in and it keeps the sand at carrying capacity. So you don't have a ton of water when you go to the restroom. It just slowly percolates down and gets filtered.
And it is all underneath here. And how big is the drain field?
The drain field is from the driveway all the way to that edge of the gate, from the front sidewalk all the way to those shrubs.
All right.
It's basically your entire front yard.
What do you think about it, little Danny? Do you think it's interesting?
I like that we can flush our toilets now.
Yeah. Okay, so now that you've seen a real-life septic system and real-life dollars that go into it as an investment and when you need to upgrade it, now that you've seen that, let's finish off here with just some of the key points of a septic system when it comes to you as a real estate investor looking to purchase a property. The first thing you want to know is when it comes to the wastewater part of the due diligence, the first question you want to know is, hey, is it a septic system or is it sewer? And as you can see from this talk, that it's quite a difference and a lot of things to consider if this is the answer, if it's a septic. So that's the first question to ask, septic or sewer? And if it is a septic, well, first of all, if you ask that and the seller's agent or the seller themselves says, oh, you know what, I'm not sure, that's a problem. So, they should know that right away. What is it? So once you determine that it is a septic system, the next thing you want to know, what is the key point, is what is the size and the location of the system. Going back to the original picture, where is this septic tank exactly? And where is the drain field exactly? Along with the septic tank, where are the access points? So you could look at the ground and you can get an idea. If someone points out that this is where it's at, look at the ground and look, is it depressed? Is the ground depressed? Or are there any signs of any issues that you could see just yourself? Any concern? Are there trees? Oh, okay, here's the septic field. Oh, and by the way, here's a really big tree that's sitting on top of it. That kind of thing. So you want to know about the size and the location of the whole system. That's the key point number 2. Okay, so the third key point is once you've determined that it is a septic system and the size and the location of the system, you want to find out from the seller, have there been any major issues with wastewater? Have there been any major issues with the septic system? And what were the issues and when were they resolved and how? And is there a work order? Is there a permit? Those are the types of things you want to know. So you ask about any major issues, and a lot of times you can see that in the seller disclosure. But sometimes it says, hey, the seller is not aware of any disclosures. Well, so that's not very helpful. So you're going to have to do your best to do on your own due diligence to find out. For example, you can piece together some of the issues by looking up the permit history from the county to see if there was a pulled permit for the septic system, and doing your best with public records to see what you can find. This also plays in when you have your property inspection, that you may need to get a septic system contractor to take a look at the system and give you an assessment as part of your due diligence. So those are things you can piece together yourself, even if the seller doesn't tell you anything. So the fourth point and the final point I have here is do your best to find out from the seller what is just an idea of the annual cost. At the end of the day, you are a real estate investor, so you have to know not just the revenues you're getting, but also all the expenses. So if there is a septic system at the property, then you absolutely have to have a line item for the septic system and at least a general idea of the cost that has been incurred on that system annually, so you can best estimate what your what your bottom line is going to be, what your profit's going to be, aka your cash flow, and ultimately your return on your investment. So these are the 4 key points when it comes to investing in a property that has a septic system. And I hope you find some value in this talk. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so that you can get a notification of these videos when they come out. Give us a like on this video, and definitely leave a comment if you've had any experience with a septic system or any questions you might have about that. Go ahead and leave us a comment down below, and we'll see you on the next video.